All right, we're going to talk about the number one mistake that everybody seems to make in real estate and how you can overcome this immediately. So, if you don't know who I am, I'm Jon Bartlett. I'm with preselling.com. And I bought hundreds of rentals, 8 figures of property, $0 out of pocket. And I did it in about 2 years. I'm looking to make softwares and services that end up making you the same amount of money that it made me. So, for zero out of pocket, by the way. So, what we're going to talk about here is how debt is the only thing that can bankrupt you and why everybody ends up doing the game wrong. So if you buy property with debt, usually the debt says, hey, it's 90% of the purchase price, and then we'll maybe cover the repairs too. But a lot of times it's personally guaranteed debt, which means that you are personally liable to pay back that loan, not the property is liable to pay back that loan. There's a difference. So that's called recourse debt, is if you are personally liable for it. That means if you buy a property for 100 and you have 90% debt on there, that means you have to come in with $10,000 and you have to pay off that $90,000. It's not you give the house back, it's you have to pay off the $90,000. If the property were to drop in value to $80,000, then you're screwed. You've now have a property that you have to come out of pocket for and then pay the difference. So that's called recourse debt. Non-recourse debt is significantly cooler, and that's going to be stuff like seller financing or also just non-recourse debt lenders. So with seller financing, it's between you and the seller, and it's very frequently structured as non-recourse debt. It's possible you can structure it a different way, but it's very typical for it to not be recourse debt. And what that says is, I'm going to buy this property, and maybe it's 10% down, so we'll just call it $10,000 to make it easy on a 100K property. So you're buying the property for only $10,000 down. If the property were to drop to, say, $90,000 of value, you could sell the property for basically the debt that's on there and walk away zero out of pocket. If the property value were to drop below $90,000, now you'd be upside down on the property, but that's when you just say, hey, you know what, seller, I'm sorry, here's the property back. And the seller would take the property back in exchange for not going after and suing you for $90,000, basically. So that's recourse debt is where they can come after you personally, and then non-recourse debt is where they don't come after you personally, they just go after the property. A DSCR lender, a debt service coverage ratio lender, lends based off of the net income of a property. So a DSCR lender is typically going to be non-recourse, and seller financing is typically going to be non-recourse. So if you see the words personal guarantee, that's referring to recourse debt in that case. So the issue that everybody has is that they say, I want to make 100% of the profit all by myself, and I want to buy all the property and own all of it all by myself and have all debt. That is like the worst thing you can possibly do, because what it does is if you're buying, say, $1 million of property and it's recourse debt and you have 100% debt, then if it ends up dropping in value to $900,000 because you don't know what you're doing, then you are now personally liable for all of it, and you will now have to come out of pocket $100,000. If you can't, you go bankrupt, right? That's not cool. However, if you did $1 million and it's on seller financing, then if it's 10% down and the property drops in value, yeah, you lost the 10% down. So how do we solve this even better? Whereas rather than you losing the 10% down, that's where you work with a capital partner. A capital partner understands there's some risk associated with real estate or with the transaction or whatnot, and they're willing to take on that risk in exchange for a high reward. So it would look as something like, hey, I can do 90% debt with the seller. They're not going to come after me personally. They're just going to take the property back if they need to. And then you've mitigated that line of risk. And then with a capital partner, you say, I need $100,000 to close this property. I need you to give me $100,000. In exchange, I'll give you 40% equity or whatever the terms are that you guys come up with. But maybe they now own 40% equity, and also it's as a loan. So now they get $100K back, and then they get 40% of the profit later. You run the whole operation. They don't have to do squat. Maybe it ends up making $1 million total profit. So they got in for $100K, and then they got $100K back plus then 40% means they got $500K back. So you can 5x somebody else's money if you're willing to be less greedy. Now, it's not greedy because you're doing a lot of work, but it's really greedy, so to speak, and stupid to end up wanting to put in all the money and also do all of the work all by yourself. Because the mistake that happens is you have no one else to double check your work because it's just you, right? If you're working with a partner, they're going to tell you if you're making a stupid mistake. If you're working with a capital partner, they're going to tell you it's a bad deal. right? But if it's just you all by yourself, you have no one there to truly care about your deal. Yeah, you can ask a buddy, but they're not going to be invested the same way that you are. But if you're working with somebody else, they will be invested the same way you are, and then they can actually help you out. So if you do this correctly, you're not personally liable to the limited partner. You're not personally liable to the seller. In theory, you're not liable at all, right? I'm not advocating that you go be stupid with other people's money. I'm advocating that you don't try to go do the whole thing all by yourself and take on all of the risk while you also don't have all of the experience or all the time or all the capital or whatever it is that you need. Yeah, that's just like the number one mistake I see a lot of people make. And it's really sad because I've seen people go bankrupt by doing it the wrong way. And it's really not rocket science, which is know what the hell you're doing and then go execute with no recourse debt to you, because eventually something bad will happen and it may not even be your fault, but eventually you might have to give a property back, in which case it's not that big a deal on your end. Yeah, your limited partner lost out, but hopefully you're going to go make it right with them and pay them out as well. So, and if not, then that's fine. They understood the risk they signed up for, which is why they're asking for an exorbitant return of 5x or whatnot. So hopefully this has been informative. If this makes any sense and you enjoy this type of content and you want to learn how you can buy property for $0 out of pocket, multiple hundreds of units, that is, not just like one or two properties, then make sure to click on the link in the bio in the description, which is for the community where you can join with our live calls and events. It's all free. There's no upsell here, no gotchas. I am planning on releasing some free products in the future as well as some paid products, but I think you're going to like the free stuff a little better. So hopefully this has been informative and hopefully it helps you in your business. Thanks.